The gleaming high-rise apartment building stood tall against the Los Angeles skyline. Inside apartment 7B, a property manager stared with barely concealed disdain at a tenant dressed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. The tenant's calm demeanor only seemed to irritate her further as she clutched the eviction notice in her manicured hands. The property manager, Sandra Mitchell, had taken over Sunset Heights Apartments just 3 months ago. She arrived with grand plans to transform the building into luxury condominiums, starting by removing what she considered undesirable tenants. The quiet man in apartment 7B, with his modest appearance and old motorcycle parked in the garage, was at the top of her list. What Sandra didn't realize was that this seemingly ordinary tenant would soon teach her the most expensive lesson of her career. The man she was so eager to evict wasn't just another resident. His true identity would send shockwaves through Los Angeles' real estate circles and make headlines across the city. As Sandra delivered her rehearsed speech about building improvements and necessary tenant changes, she failed to notice the subtle hints around the apartment. A well-worn script on the coffee table, a motorcycle helmet signed by famous directors, and a collection of rare books that spoke of refined taste beyond their worn covers. Her focus remained fixed on his casual appearance and quiet lifestyle, blind to the signs that might have saved her from the storm about to break. In just 24 hours, Sandra Mitchell would learn why appearances can be deceiving and why treating people with respect isn't just good manners, it's good business. This is the story of how one landlord's rushed judgment led to the most regrettable decision of her professional life. Inside Sandra Mitchell's sleek office, the morning sun cast long shadows across her modern desk as she reviewed the latest tenant records. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the glass surface, while her eyes narrowed at the file labeled 7B. 3 months into her position as the new property manager of Sunset Heights, Sandra had already marked several tenants for removal, but this particular resident irritated her most. The sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled through the courtyard, drawing her attention to the window. There he was again, the mysterious tenant from 7B, parking his dusty Triumph motorcycle next to the building's pristine water feature. Sandra watched as he dismounted, wearing the same worn leather jacket she'd seen countless times. His long hair fell messily around his face as he removed his helmet, and his faded jeans had clearly seen better days. Sandra turned to her assistant, Rebecca, who stood nervously by the door. "Have you gathered all the documentation for 7B's eviction?" she asked, her voice sharp with authority. Rebecca nodded, clutching a manila folder to her chest. "Everything's ready, but Ms. Mitchell, are you sure about this? He's never been late with rent, and other tenants say he's incredibly kind." Sandra cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Rebecca, we're not running a charity here. Sunset Heights is about to become the most exclusive address in Los Angeles. We can't have people like him bringing down property values. Did you see that motorcycle? The way he dresses? He doesn't fit our new image." Outside, the tenant walked quietly through the courtyard, stopping to help Mrs. Fleming from 4A with her grocery bags. Sandra watched through the window, her lip curling slightly. The other tenants' obvious affection for him only fueled her determination. How could they not see that people like him were holding the building back from its true potential? Later that afternoon, Sandra adjusted her designer blazer and straightened her gold nameplate before heading to 7B. The hallway's newly installed marble floors echoed beneath her Louboutin heels as she approached his door. She had rehearsed this moment carefully, prepared her speech about building improvements and changing standards. What she wasn't prepared for was how this confrontation would ultimately shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about success, status, and true class. Sandra knocked sharply on the door of apartment 7B, smoothing her silk blouse as she waited. The door opened quietly, revealing the tenant who had become the focus of her renovation plans. He stood calmly in the doorway, dressed in his usual simple attire, a plain black t-shirt and worn jeans. The contrast between his modest appearance and the building's luxurious hallway only reinforced her conviction. The apartment behind him was sparsely furnished but impeccably clean. A few worn leather-bound books sat on a simple wooden coffee table, and a laptop rested on a desk near the window. Sandra noted with disapproval that he hadn't upgraded any of the original fixtures or appliances, unlike other tenants who had invested in luxury renovations. "Good afternoon," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that didn't match his seemingly shabby surroundings. Sandra straightened her shoulders, clutching the manila folder containing the eviction notice. "Mr. John Smith," she began, using the name from his lease, "I'm here to discuss some important changes happening at Sunset Heights." She explained the upcoming renovations, the new luxury amenities plan, and the significant rent increases that would follow. Her tone grew increasingly condescending as she detailed the new minimum income requirements and lifestyle standards expected of residents. Throughout her rehearsed speech, the tenant listened quietly, his expression remaining neutral. In the hallway, other residents began to gather, drawn by the sound of Sandra's voice. Mrs. Fleming from 4A watched with concern, while Mr. Rodriguez from 5C shook his head disapprovingly. They had all experienced Sandra's aggressive push for upgrading the building's tenant profile, but none had expected her to target the kindest resident in the building. "The eviction notice gives you 30 days to vacate the premises," Sandra concluded, holding out the document. "Given your current situation, I assume you'll need the full time to make arrangements." She glanced meaningfully at his simple clothing and modest surroundings. The tenant took the notice carefully, reading it without any change in his serene expression. "I understand you're doing your job, Ms. Mitchell," he said softly, "but have you considered how these changes affect the community here? Some of these people have lived in this building for decades." Sandra's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Community? This is prime Los Angeles real estate, not a neighborhood potluck. We're creating an exclusive living experience for those who appreciate true luxury." She gestured at his apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Clearly, some adjustments in our resident profile are necessary." The gathering crowd in the hallway grew larger. Sandra could hear their whispers of disapproval, but she remained focused on her target. The tenant's continued calm only served to irritate her further. Why wasn't he upset? Why wasn't he begging to stay, like the others had? "I've invested considerably in this property," she continued, her voice growing harder. "The new Sunset Heights will be a symbol of success and sophistication. We need residents who reflect that image." She looked pointedly at his worn motorcycle boots by the door. The tenant nodded thoughtfully. "Success and sophistication can take many forms, Ms. Mitchell. Sometimes the quietest rooms hold the most valuable treasures." His words carried a weight she couldn't quite understand, and for a moment, doubt flickered across her face. But Sandra quickly dismissed the feeling. She had already begun marketing the renovated units to wealthy executives and celebrities. This shabby-looking tenant, with his old motorcycle and worn clothes, had no place in her vision for the building's future. She had no idea that her ambition was about to collide spectacularly with reality, or that the man standing before her would soon turn her carefully laid plans upside down. As she turned to leave, satisfied with her power play, she caught a glimpse of something unusual on his desk, what looked like a film script with notable Hollywood letterhead. For a brief moment, she hesitated, but her certainty and her judgment quickly overwhelmed any curiosity. That decision would soon prove to be the biggest mistake of her career, one that would teach her an unforgettable lesson about the true meaning of class and character. The next morning, Sandra sat in the building's management office, reviewing applications from potential high-end tenants. Her focus was interrupted by a knock on the door. Rebecca entered, her face unusually pale. "Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here from Matrix Productions. They say it's urgent." Sandra looked up, puzzled. A well-dressed executive stood behind Rebecca, his expression serious. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you've served an eviction notice to one of our most valuable clients." He placed a business card on her desk. "I'm David Cohen, head of production. We need to discuss this immediately." Sandra's confusion grew as she examined the card. Matrix Productions was one of Hollywood's biggest studios. What could they possibly want with her building's eviction notices? I'm not sure I understand, she began, but David cut her off. The tenant in 7B. You served him papers yesterday. David's tone carried an authority that made Sandra sit up straighter. That tenant, Ms. Mitchell, is Keanu Reeves. He's currently filming 3 major projects with us, and that apartment provides him the privacy and normalcy he values during production. The color drained from Sandra's face as the reality of her situation crashed over her. Memories of her interactions with the tenant flashed through her mind. Her condescending tone, her dismissive gestures, her assumptions about his worth based on his appearance. She had treated one of Hollywood's most respected actors like an unwanted vagrant. There must be some mistake, Sandra stammered, her confident facade crumbling. The lease is under the name John Smith. David's expression remained stern. Mr. Reeves values his privacy. He's lived there peacefully for years, contributing quietly to the building's community. Previous management understood and respected this arrangement. The office door opened again, and Sandra's heart nearly stopped. Keanu Reeves walked in, dressed in his usual simple attire, but now she saw him with new eyes. The quiet dignity she had mistaken for shabby humility, the calm confidence she had interpreted as resignation. It all made terrible sense. Mr. Reeves, Sandra began, standing quickly, but he raised a hand gently to stop her. Please sit, he said, his voice carrying the same warmth it always had. I think we need to have an honest conversation about community and respect. Keanu settled into a chair, his presence somehow making the luxurious office feel small. You know, Sandra, I chose this building years ago because it had something special, real people, real connections. Mrs. Fleming's cooking, Mr. Rodriguez's stories about his grandchildren, the way everyone looks out for each other. That's true luxury. Sandra's carefully constructed world of surface appearances began to crumble. She watched as Keanu pulled out the eviction notice she had delivered with such smug satisfaction just yesterday. This isn't just about me, he continued. It's about every resident you've pushed out, every family you've displaced in pursuit of what you think luxury means. The morning sun streamed through the office windows, illuminating the contrast between Keanu's humble demeanor and Sandra's superficial trappings of success. Outside the office, a crowd had gathered, residents who had heard the news, maintenance staff who had always known but kept a secret, and Rebecca, who watched through the glass with a mixture of awe and vindication. I could easily buy this entire building, Keanu said quietly, but that's not what this is about. It's about understanding that true class isn't about marble floors or designer labels. It's about how we treat people, especially when we think they can't offer us anything in return. Sandra sat in stunned silence, her carefully manicured nails digging into her palms. Every dismissive comment, every condescending gesture she had made played back in her mind, now transformed into moments of shameful arrogance. The very things she had dismissed, his modest dress, his quiet manner, his concern for others, were precisely what made him the person he was. The eviction notices, Keanu continued, all of them need to be withdrawn. The renovation plans need to be reconsidered with the current residents in mind. His tone was firm but not unkind. This building isn't just a property investment, Sandra. It's a home, and homes are built on respect, not square footage. David Cohen nodded in agreement, adding, the studio is prepared to take whatever steps necessary to protect Mr. Reeves's privacy and ensure the well-being of this community. The implied threat was clear. Sandra's actions hadn't just affected one tenant. They had attracted the attention of one of Hollywood's most powerful studios. Sandra's voice trembled as she finally spoke. I had no idea. Please, let me make this right. But even as the words left her mouth, she realized the hollow inadequacy of her response. How could she make right something that shouldn't have happened in the first place? The judgment, the disdain, the casual cruelty, none of it should have happened, regardless of who the tenant was. News of the confrontation spread through Los Angeles' real estate circles with stunning speed. By afternoon, Reporters gathered outside Sunset Heights, their cameras trained on the building's elegant entrance. Inside, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. Residents who had lived in fear of eviction now walked the halls with renewed confidence, sharing their own stories of Sandra's previous treatment. Sandra remained in her office, blinds drawn, watching her carefully constructed world unravel. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from her superiors, real estate journalists, and other property managers. The story had become a powerful cautionary tale about judgment and discrimination in the housing market. Mrs. Fleming knocked on Sandra's office door, carrying a plate of her famous dumplings. The elderly woman who Sandra had once dismissed as not fitting the building's image now stood before her with an offer of comfort. "Everyone makes mistakes," Mrs. Fleming said softly, placing the plate on Sandra's desk. "The important thing is learning from them." The property ownership group called an emergency meeting. Sandra sat silently as they reviewed the situation, her usual confident posture replaced by a demeanor of genuine humility. The board members discussed not just the PR disaster, but the fundamental flaws in their approach to community and property management. Keanu's influence extended beyond just stopping the evictions. His production company proposed a new initiative, a program to preserve affordable housing within luxury developments, ensuring long-term residents wouldn't be priced out of their homes. The same connection Sandra had hoped to attract through exclusive renovations now arrived with a different purpose: creating sustainable, inclusive communities. Rebecca organized a meeting in the building's common room, where residents shared their experiences. Mr. Rodriguez spoke about raising 3 generations in his apartment. A young artist described how the building's affordable rent allowed her to pursue her dreams. Each story highlighted what Sandra had failed to see, that true value wasn't measured in granite countertops or premium appliances. The media coverage focused not just on Keanu's star power, but on the larger issues of gentrification and community displacement. Interviews with residents revealed a tight-knit community that supported each other through hardships, celebrated successes together, and embodied the very essence of what makes a building more than just walls and windows. Sandra watched as other property managers visited Sunset Heights, not to study its luxury features, but to learn from its community model. The building she had seen as outdated now became a template for balanced urban development, proving that profit and community weren't mutually exclusive. Keanu continued his quiet life in 7B, politely declining interviews, but using his influence to support positive changes. His production company established a foundation to help other buildings maintain their diverse communities while upgrading facilities. The motorcycle still sat in its usual spot, but now other residents smiled at its presence, understanding it as a symbol of authenticity in an increasingly superficial world. As weeks passed, Sandra's perspective underwent a profound transformation. She began attending resident meetings, not to dictate changes but to listen and learn. She discovered that Mrs. Fleming had been a renowned chef in Shanghai, that Mr. Rodriguez was a retired architecture professor, and that each resident brought unique value to the building's character. The renovation plans were redesigned with resident input, focusing on necessary improvements while preserving the building's character and affordability. The marble floors Sandra had been so proud of were the last of their kind. Instead, resources went toward community spaces, sustainable upgrades, and maintaining the building's historic charm. 1 month after the confrontation, Sandra found a note in her office. In Keanu's distinct handwriting, it read, "The greatest luxury in life is the respect we show each other. Thank you for learning this lesson alongside us." Attached was an invitation to Mrs. Fleming's monthly community dinner, an honor she had once dismissed but now understood as a true mark of acceptance. The transformation of Sunset Heights became more than just a story about a celebrity tenant. It marked a fundamental shift in how luxury real estate could coexist with community values. Sandra's office, once a symbol of exclusivity, transformed into a community hub where residents could freely share their concerns and ideas. The property group appointed Sandra to lead their new Community First initiative, recognizing that her experience had given her unique insight into the importance of balanced development. She approached this role with newfound humility, using her past mistakes to guide better decisions. During a particularly meaningful community meeting, Sandra stood before the residents she had once wanted to evict. "Success isn't measured by the height of our buildings or the price of our amenities," she said, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "It's measured by the strength of our connections and the dignity with which we treat each other." Keanu's presence in the building remained low-key, but his impact resonated throughout the real estate industry. Other property managers began reconsidering their aggressive upgrade policies, looking for ways to improve properties while preserving their essential character and communities. The building's renovation proceeded, but with a different vision. Instead of luxury fixtures, they invested in sustainable technologies. Rather than exclusive amenities, they created shared spaces that brought residents together. The old motorcycle parking area, which Sandra had planned to convert into premium car spaces, became a community garden where Mrs. Fleming grew vegetables for her famous dumplings. 1 year after the confrontation, Sunset Heights hosted an open house, not to attract wealthy new tenants, but to showcase how luxury and community could coexist. Property developers from across the country came to learn from what the media had dubbed the Keanu effect, the practice of developing properties with respect for existing communities. Sandra found herself changed in unexpected ways. She still dressed professionally, but her designer labels no longer served as armor. Her success now came from her ability to listen, understand, and serve her community. The condescending property manager who had once looked down on a simply dressed tenant had become an advocate for inclusive urban development. Mr. Rodriguez's grandchildren played in the building's renovated courtyard, their laughter mixing with the sound of Mrs. Fleming's cooking classes in the new community kitchen. The young artist who had feared eviction now displayed her work in the building's lobby, her success a testament to the importance of affordable housing and nurturing talent. On quiet evenings, residents would sometimes see Keanu returning on his motorcycle, still dressed simply, still greeting everyone with genuine warmth. His choice to remain in the building, despite his fame and wealth, served as a daily reminder that true class had nothing to do with appearance or status. The final piece of the building's transformation came in the form of a new policy. Long-term residents would have their rents protected, ensuring they could remain in their homes regardless of market pressures. The policy, dubbed the 7B provision, became a model for other buildings seeking to balance progress with preservation. Sandra kept the eviction notice she had served to Keanu, framed in her office as a reminder. Below it, she placed a simple quote, "Judge not by the cover, but by the community we create." These words, which she saw every morning, guided her decisions and reminded her of the lesson that had changed everything. As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across Sunset Heights' facade, the building stood as a testament to the power of humility, respect, and community. The luxury Sandra had once pursued through exclusivity had been found instead in the genuine connections between neighbors, the sharing of stories, and the simple dignity of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or position. This story became more than just an embarrassing moment for one property manager. It became a movement, demonstrating that true sophistication lies not in the materials we use to build our buildings, but in how we build our communities. And somewhere in apartment 7B, a humble tenant continued to embody this truth, one quiet greeting at a time. The sun cast a warm glow over Sunset Heights as Sandra locked her office for the evening. Through the lobby window, she watched Keanu park his motorcycle in its usual spot, exchanging friendly waves with residents heading home from work. The building hummed with the kind of energy that only comes from a true community. Sandra touched the framed eviction notice on her wall one last time before leaving. That piece of paper had changed not just her career, but her entire understanding of success. The simple tenant she had once judged so harshly had taught her the most valuable lesson of her life, that true luxury isn't found in marble floors or designer labels, but in the respectful connections we build with others. As she walked through the courtyard, Past Mrs. Fleming's thriving garden and the children playing near the fountain, Sandra realized that sometimes the most powerful transformations come from our biggest mistakes. The building she had once wanted to remake into a symbol of exclusivity had become something far more valuable, a template for how communities could grow stronger together, regardless of status or appearance. And somewhere above, in apartment 7B, a humble tenant continued to prove that true class needs no announcement. It speaks through actions, not appearances.